Welcome, everyone, to Medicine Needs Poetry, a health sciences professional development for Creighton University. We are so excited to have our speaker, Janna Lopez. I've actually been in classes with Janna, some small group classes, and had some personal time with Janna as well. And she is an incredible teacher. So you are not going to be disappointed about our session today. Janna is our inaugural poet in residence for medical humanities in the School of Medicine, and she is also the founder of Poetic Intelligence. And it's just a great program that she has put together in teaching sessions to faculty or to students or to staff that would just like a little bit more to what they're doing. I even have some original poetry hanging on my wall in my office that is by Janna. And she does an incredible job at writing poetry, but also teaching it. So we're very glad to have her with us today. And I'm going to give you the floor, Janna.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to a really wonderful and happy, joyous time. This is something I love talking about. And so I'm so glad that you are all here with me. And what we're going to do is just take our time and hopefully I'm going to explain the background and thinking and rationale for the work. But really, I want to spend the majority of the time helping you understand the how and the why that you can apply poetry into your own life. And I'm going to have you write. So, what I'm going to ask you to do right now, if you can, is to grab a pen and paper. Pen and paper. I use these blank books because I'm going to have you write. And I do believe that pen to paper, not laptop, not computer, is the way to really start what I call having a conversation with yourself. I'm analog that way. I can't help it. I love that I'm old school with pen and paper, but it really is part of the process to give you that intentionality and that 5 minutes to connect, to write, and to have that meaningful moment that you are not looking at a screen, but rather spending time with yourself. That is the hope. And so, what we're going to do is I'm going to start right now with asking you a question. And what I'd like you to do is just take a moment and respond. And so the question is, and I call these invitations, invitations into a conversation with yourself. So the invitation is for you to take a moment or two to just be here now, right? But to ask yourself, where are you? And you can answer that question any way you feel makes sense for you. But right now, in this moment, where are you? And usually there's like lots of thoughts that are going through people's heads, all the places that they are. But just to ask yourself, where are you? And sometimes we're so many places that we can't even answer that question. And it's not uncommon that people have a hard time even identifying where they are. Some people may say, I'm still in the lab, or I'm still with those patients, or I'm still thinking about what I need to do this weekend. And there's no denial that the mind is always going to try to trick us into telling us what it is it thinks it needs to know. But the reason why I do the work that I do and why I'm so committed to the work that I do is because I honestly believe that as human beings, we're losing our ability to be present. And I know that sounds simplistic, but what being present means to me is as human beings, we're losing our ability to grapple. We're losing our ability to reflect. We're losing our ability to internalize our experiences. And I can give you an example that often, if we're going out to dinner or we're hanging out with friends, usually people are taking pictures and selfies of the meal and of their time and posting them rather than just being with their friends. And my favorite example of what I call the disappearing inner landscape is when I was a kid, I used to love going to a play, going to the theater. Getting dressed up was part of the ritual, getting fancy clothes on, and I'd be with my grandparents and we'd go to the theater. And I remember sitting in the theater for that 5 or 10 minutes when everything was quiet and you could hear people kind of murmuring and chatting and talking. But in that 5 or 10 minutes, I would just look around the room at the gorgeous big red velvet curtains and the ornate lights and fixtures. And I would look at people sitting in their seats. Everybody was dressed up. Maybe some people were milling around down towards the orchestra pit. But what that moment or two or five was really about was just being present and sitting and observing and just taking in the world. And the contrast is I went to go see Hamilton like a year and a half ago, and just sitting there and I looked around and 99 out of 100 people were buried with their faces in their phones. Like everybody was just sitting there waiting with their faces glowing, and nobody was really taking in their environment. And, this is a very common thing. We're losing our ability to just be with ourselves. And as physicians and doctors and people in the healthcare profession, all very much, expectations being pulled in a lot of directions. And there's a lot of conversation and talk around how many physicians or those who are providing care have lost the ability to take care of themselves. And we all know the statistics about burnout and moral injury and not really being able to prioritize yourself. And so physicians, in my opinion, and teachers, educators, faculty, we have become conditioned to put ourselves last. We put ourselves last. And what that has cost is an enormous tidal wave of loneliness. Most people feel lonely. Most people, even though they're connected to people all day long, really don't have a sense of their own connection and their own reflection and their own expression. And so poetry becomes a really powerful, hidden in plain sight superpower and a remedy to allow people to take the 5 minutes, whenever and however, to just connect and plug in. And so I talk about this and the urgency of this. And so, like what I was sharing is, what is the urgency of poetry at this time? What is the urgency for you as a human, as somebody who cares about others or is sacrificed your own time to give to others? But for humans, it's really about, I believe every human deserves to be expressed. We're losing our inner landscape. We're losing our ability to connect. Brain rot, this really shows up with not being able to focus, not being able to concentrate. We're no longer processing or internalizing our human experience. And something I care deeply about is this over-reliance on artificial intelligence, which is in every aspect of our human life. And I joke, I say, when it started with Clippy and Microsoft Word, those were like the earliest seeds of artificial intelligence. Little did we know, right? So, but the urgency for medicine is that poetry does provide a clear path to process contradiction. This is my favorite thing about poetry for medicine, is that it gives a way to process contradiction, and we will talk about that. Helps us grapple with our humanness, science, nature, and technology. It covers all of those basics. It expels heavy burden and stress, fear of failure, and disappointment. It maintains deep, intentional connection to self, separate from your title or your role or the expectations put on you. And one of the other great things I love about poetry is that it makes room for new understanding beyond and not tethered to our intellectualized meaning. And in our minds, it's chocolate or vanilla. It's good or bad. We're on, we're off. We're right, we're wrong. Our minds tend to polarize and synthesize information in a way that gives our lives this intellectualized meaning of what we're experiencing. But poetry really is about the feeling and the releasing and the expressing, and is very separate from what we know. And what I always say is, because why not? Poetry is free, accessible anytime, anywhere, for any reason. So that covers a little bit about the urgency of poetry. And so let me just start with my definition of poetry, because a lot of people have ideas about what they think poetry is or what it isn't. And I have kind of a different understanding of poetry. And I put writing and expression and poetry, they're all related in the same kind of terminology. But this is my definition. And poetry is a way of being, connecting, observing, reflecting, and embodying your experience of being alive and making meaning of human life through imagery, written words, and self-expression. So poetry covers a lot of ground. And so what I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, if you want to drop in the chat, how do you feel about that definition of poetry? Do you feel like it's in alignment with what you think? Is it different from what you think? Does that open up anything to you with the idea of poetry becoming maybe just a little more approachable? And that's part of my goal with you here now, is because I'm fully aware of people's opinions and perceptions and judgments around what they think poetry is and what it isn't, and how it's not for you, and why it's complicated and out of reach. And so just by redefining what poetry is, hopefully can open you up a little bit to maybe just thinking of it about like how you experience your life, how you express your life, how you engage in your life. And that to me is poetry. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the poetic intelligence method is itself, and then I'm going to have you write. And so let me just look at the comments really quick, because this is very important. So Jessica shares that the definition feels bigger than what was previously thought, more important. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think so too. Hi, Nicole. Nicole says it feels less esoteric, and that poetry is for all of us. Poetry is about being human, not about being lofty or academic. Yes, I really do feel that way, and I'm glad that it feels less esoteric. Hi, Amy. Thanks for being here. It's a way of describing that it's liberating and freeing, opens up possibility. I love that you said that, Amy. So one of the things that I describe is what poetry gives us is when we tell the stories about who we are, what we do, how we show up in the world, what we express, usually 9.9 times out of 10, we're talking about what I describe are the stories about the stories. These are the things that we tell people about who we are, what we do, how we process information. It's the way we've probably said those things thousands of times before. And when we do that, there's no new connection, no new understanding, no new wisdom necessarily, because we're just repeating what we think we know, right? But with poetry, to Amy's point, is that poetry creates a possibility of possibility. Meaning, when we start to engage with words and expression, we start to create something we didn't expect. And that when we're in that space of being open and creating, we end up with new wisdom and new understanding. And so the possibility of possibility. So, hi, Lorna. Thanks for joining. Poetry becomes part of every moment, not tucked away in stuffy pages. Yes, exactly. I love that. Thank you for those wonderful comments. And so let's describe the process itself of poetic intelligence. You'll start to understand a little bit more about how possibility of possibility and how this is effective, not just for people in the medical profession, but really what I'm mostly here for right now is you as a person in the world. If you can take away one thing that makes you think something differently or believe something differently or gives you a way to apply something differently, where you can have a moment of relief or release, and you can start to cultivate more self-compassion through this very surprising yet effective application of poetry, then I am going to feel pretty darn happy for you, for us, and this is why I'm here. And so let's talk a little bit about what is the poetic intelligence method. So I believe poetic intelligence is a noun and a verb. And so what this means to me as a noun, poetic intelligence is sort of a way, an aspirational way of wanting to feel, be, and create in the world. I would love to have more poetic intelligence. As a verb, it's a way of engaging with yourself and your world, and what I call having a conversation with yourself. So before I get into the poetic intelligence, three important concepts about what I teach and talk about. Number one, writing is an invitation and not an expectation. And I'll say that again. Writing is an invitation and not an expectation. Maybe I'll come back to this in just a moment. So, because many people have, especially academic people, they have so many expectations about what writing has to do, be, how it has to be annotated and factual and research driven. And a lot of those embedded thoughts that you have or that you've amassed or have evolved over the years about how you relate to writing can be it can be prohibitive and intimidating when or if you sit down to think about writing poetry, because it has to be correct, or the grammar has to make sense, or it structurally has to flow in a certain way. And so a lot of my work is actually helping people unlearn what they've learned about writing so they can actually start to free themselves up in this creative, expressive way. And so writing as an invitation, not an expectation. That's the first thing. And what does that mean to you? Write down this question, and maybe later you can take a minute or two and ask yourself how you feel about your writing as an invitation and not an expectation. The second thing I believe is that writing is always and only going to be for an audience of one, and that's you. It's for yourself. And this idea actually takes a lot of time to unravel and unhinge because you've all spent your careers and your lives creating documents and words and writing that has been substantiated and peer reviewed and always about the outward facing impact of your writing. And so to start to think about, and I'm talking purely about creative writing here, we're not talking about research writing, but for expressive writing, for poetry, it's always only going to be for an audience of one, and that's for yourself. And so to give your mind a way to kind of not get all, like discombobulated, like, what does that mean? What I say is that when you're writing and when you're in expression, it's always only for you. You can choose to edit later or not. So let yourself off the hook. You don't have to edit as you go. This stops people from being free in their creative expression, is grammar and punctuation and structure rules. So you can always edit later. And then you can choose to share it later or not. Now, a lot of the doctors that I've worked with, really amazing, brilliant, giving, caring people, have such a hard time imagining that they can put themselves first in any equation. But when you sit down to write and when you start to engage with poetry, you are at the center of your own universe in that moment. And you can give yourself that allowance to just create for no purpose for yourself. And it's not the writing that I teach, the process or the way this all goes. The harder parts is actually getting people to meet themselves where they are and understand what their fears and judgments and expectations are around the voice they show up with in the world. And a lot of the doctors that I've worked with, physicians, faculty, the voice they have out in the world may not match the voice that they have to be creative, because many of you have spent years away and distanced, and that part of yourself could likely be buried deep within you. That part of your expression could likely be a long time ago. It is not uncommon that a physician or a faculty member will say to me, I haven't written creatively since I was in high school. And this is the harder part. This is the harder part, to recognize that within you is the part of you that wants to express, that is probably super creative and very poetic, and that it's not going to maybe mirror or match the voice that you share out in the world. And that is awesome. And so we want to get to that part of you and your expression. All right. So those are the three things: for yourself, conversation, and invitation. So then when I'm teaching poetry, the reason why poetry is so effective is because many people have a lot of judgments and expectations about what they think poetry actually is. So it's a perfect mechanism, vehicle, channel, portal, or tool to help people stop and pause and rethink and reevaluate what they think they know. And this is really an amazing tool for physicians and even faculty to start factoring into your mindset, is that the possibility of possibility can actually create something new for you. So as I'm sitting there and I'm presenting a poem, I will talk to somebody and I will say, we're going to start first. Observation. What do you notice in the poem? What images or concepts speak to you? And what observation does is it teaches us to closer examine and take time to evaluate and avoid assumptions. The second thing is, let's say I have a poem in front of us and I'm having you read it, and you're not used to reading poetry, and you feel uncomfortable. And if you're like me, I used to feel like the idiot in the room, that everybody else got the poem and the secret handshake but me, because I wasn't smart enough or educated enough. So I had to really learn how to get out of my own way But this is where curiosity comes in. So step 2 is curiosity. I may not understand what this abstract poem means, and I may feel like I'm incompetent, but being curious shifts me out of that mindset. And what does this mean to me? Are there other ways to understand or see? So being curious when you're reading a poem that you don't understand really opens up this idea of curiosity. The third is what I call invitation, which we briefly talked about, and that's how can I step into a dialogue with this? What ideas might I contribute? How can I be more confident in what I see or understand and how to express it? And so what I want, before we do it, I'm going to actually have you go through, we're going to do this with a poem where I have you apply some of these ideas of poetic intelligence. But what I'd like to hear in the chat, if you don't mind, is does that make sense so far? Is everybody tracking with what I'm saying? And keeping up? Any questions? Anything that's not making sense yet? And I'm going to read Jim's comment. The definition makes poetry more active rather than passive. Yes, beautiful. All right. So if you have any comments or questions, we will keep rolling here. So poetic intelligence. When I look at a poem, I have them go through this process and it starts to open up understanding. And so we're going to do this couple of minutes because this is what we're here for, to put on some training wheels. So I'm going to share a poem and then we're going to unpack it together using observation, curiosity, and invitation. So I just picked a small poem because I thought it would be easy for us. And it was a haiku, but that's irrelevant to the point. Just a small poem. So one day, Sorry says, dreams left an empty table, hungry once again. One day, Sorry says, dreams left an empty table, hungry once again. And so using observation, I would say, here's a poem, and what do you observe? And observation can be, I notice it's the tactical things, it's 3 lines. I notice there's no capitalizations. I notice that Sorry has something to say. So observation is just really either the images you observe, the specifics, or the logistics of a poem that you observe. And the idea is that when we start to apply these methods through all poetry, there could be a very long, complicated poem or a 3-line poem. It doesn't matter. The process is the same. So observation, what do you observe? So I'm just going to go to the chat really quick because I want this to be interactive. Observation, what do you observe? Quotation marks. Okay, so sorry is humanized. I notice that one day statement I make so often. Yes, thank you, Dorothy. That's beautiful. And so observation is really an important part of the first part of poetic intelligence. All right, the next part is curiosity. I wonder why sorry is sorry. I wonder what sorry is sorry about. I wonder why the table is empty. Once again, I wonder, what does hunger represent? There's a lot of ways curiosity could show up in this poem. So what are you curious about in this poem? One day seems like hope for the future. I love that. Yes. Anything else that you're curious about? The dreams. Curious if it's pessimistic. These are great. Good work, Amy. I love that, Dorothy. There could be a pessimistic or an optimistic flavor to this, right? And what are those dreams? These are perfect things to be curious about. Sorry is talking about missed opportunity. Excellent, Lisa. So even in a small little 3-line poem, there's a lot to be curious about. All right, so then we're going to go into this next part. And this is the basis of my teaching, and this is invitation. And what invitation is about is inviting yourself into what I've called a conversation with yourself. And so this is where you get to reflect, if even 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and invite yourself into a conversation. So what that means is, and it could come from your observations, it could come from your curiosity, but it doesn't mean it has to. It could or it might not, but the conversation with yourself is really where here we get to invite yourself and reflect. And so that might be something that you are putting off, that you think it's time to start inviting yourself back into, or something you've missed about something in your life, or something you want to do. So inviting yourself into a conversation here could yield anything. It could yield anything. And so that's what I would like you to do right now, is to take 3 minutes and with your pen and paper and invite yourself into a conversation with this poem. Invite yourself. Whatever came up from this poem for you, doesn't matter. No right or wrong. So just take a few moments and jot down your thoughts. Okay. So we've all had busy days leading up to this moment of sitting here together. And what I'm curious about is, how does it feel just to put aside everything and all the chaos and chatter and really just take a minute or two and to reflect and to express? To notice that, to just notice that. And I believe that invitations are everywhere and poetry is everywhere. And so before we get into some ways I want to give you that you can integrate this into your daily life or occasional life, or however and whenever invitations show up, because that's the thing. It is not an expectation that we do this. It's an invitation to do this, and that's different. I was never one, I did not love The Artist's Way. I'm a little bit older, but I remember that book came out And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this. And the Artist's Way is all based on this idea of daily morning pages. And I got the book and I'm like, okay, I'm starting Monday. I'm starting Monday along with my diet, right? But I'm going to start writing my daily pages on Monday. And Monday would come around and I would sit down to write, and then the blanking screen would look at me and I just couldn't say anything. I didn't feel anything. And then the pressure and then the expectation and the weight on my chest. And of course, every other 5,000 people that are doing it understands it and gets it, but I'm not the one that's doing it and getting it. So it only made me feel worse about myself, which disincentivized me and left me feeling like very uninspired. So I am not the person that says, you need to do this every day, schedule this. I say 5 minutes in the morning with coffee or tea certainly is a great way to start the day, but inspiration can happen anywhere. And to realize the gap moments that you have where you can take 5 minutes to engage with poetry are all around you. It's 5 minutes less of doom scrolling, 5 minutes less of cat videos. When you're in line at the grocery store, don't get on your phone. Look around and observe. Be curious and invite yourself into a conversation. Writing poetry or being with poetry doesn't have to happen at a space, at a time. It can happen when you're in the car sitting in traffic. It can happen before you sit down and you start to work. Take 5 minutes and just pick up a book and read a poem, even if you don't know what it means. There's plenty of great books out there, and I'm going to talk about that too. But the idea is that it's available anytime, anywhere, for any reason. So invitations are the work. So what I'm going to have you do right now is I'm going to put up on the screen 4 invitations. And I want you just to pick one word and take 2 minutes and write whatever comes up. No expectation, just whatever comes up. So pick one of these words and just write in response. So one thing I will encourage, because we're in this turbo thrust of an hour of doing this work together. But one thing I would like to encourage is if one of those invitations you started to write something and something came up and it clicked something open to you, go back and revisit it. And even when we're done with this call, finish your thought before you get into the rest of your busy day. Or later tonight or tomorrow morning, like there's no expectation, but prom and sunrise, those are all really interesting words. And the beautiful thing about invitations is that they often tap into a part of us outside of our stories about the stories. It ignites something new or something nostalgic or an essence or a memory. And I can't really explain it in a Zoom or in an hour, but the impact of this work is profound. That when you do this, these invitations over time, what you're doing is you're building trust between yourself and yourself. You're starting to hear and listen. And the more you are present for yourself and you show up in this way and you allow your words the room and your expression, the room that it's dying for, it really wants and needs from you. This is what stress and burnout and overwhelm, we're so overstimulated and we're so disconnected from ourselves. But it's really profound that just 5 minutes, when we start to connect and make these spaces and intentions for our words, they will start to take care of you. They start to give back. They start to hold you, and you start to relieve stress and relive beautiful memories. And so one example is, like, I can think about my mom. She passed away a year ago, and I could tell you a story about my mom, and I could maybe tell you about what she was about. But when I think of the smell of Noxzema and what the smell of that face cream does, I can go back and in a visceral, tactile, tangible way feel the essence of my mother. And that's the difference between thinking about writing and writing in response and allowing invitations to open up our expression. It starts to reach us in deeper places. And so memories become moments, moments of who we are, moments of who we've always been. We get to reclaim and give back those parts of ourselves that were depleted from, that were disassociated from, that were overwhelmed from. And this is how the human part of self-compassion starts to come in. And so in the book, which we'll talk about, Medicine Needs Poetry, this is kind of my blueprint that I wanted people to understand. I say it's an open invitation to cultivate more self-care and compassion through words. And I mean it 100%, that this is for you to cultivate your own self-compassion. And so the more you show up, the more you make room, the more you start to discover about that lost, lonely, honest, authentic, beautiful essence of who you've always been. And poetry really can do that. Like, poetry starts to ignite and make those connection points. So reading poetry, writing poetry, it doesn't matter. It's all part of your conversation with yourself. So based on what I talked about, before I get into the last segment, I would like to know, what is one thing you have taken away so far from what I've talked about and described? I've talked about connection, conversation, invitation, poetic intelligence. I've have you written from invitations. So in this very brief time we've had together, what's something that's stirring in your thinking, feeling, reflecting about where we are, what we've gotten to so far? Writing is an invitation, not an expectation. That is awesome. Yes, you can write for just you, Jessica. Invitation, no expectation, resonated for me, no pressure. I mean, that's such a different way of thinking about writing. Even having that tiny seed of reimagining what writing can hold or offer is, it's something. It's like a crack in the door. It's such a small thing, but it starts to make the breeze come in. You know how it's kind of warm out, and then you open the door a crack and it siphons the air and you start to feel that breeze. That's what this idea can do, writing as an invitation and not an expectation. And Nicole shares poetry as self-care. A real connection to self. Yes, 100%. Allowing yourself to find a way to poetry to express the stress we repress day to day. Yes, awesome. Wonderful. I love this. I love this for each of you. And so, are there any questions that anybody has yet at this point too? I'm going to close the chat and I am going to view multi-speaker if I can. Not multi-speaker. Let's view the gallery view because I like seeing everybody if I can. So if you don't have your camera on, that's cool. But I would like to see everybody if they would like to be seen. I would love to just see everybody. And you don't have to, like I know this is, but this means a lot to me to make sure that we're all connected and in a space and I'm not just a talking head. But it's nice seeing everybody. So awesome. I'm so glad you're all here. And look at that. Hey everybody. All right, beautiful. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about, and then we'll close it up with Q&A. But just start thinking if you do have any questions, because I want you to leave here with a tangible, how am I going to do this every day? What does this look like? Because it is entirely possible that you can integrate this, and there's no big equipment you need to buy, no big Kaplan folders that you need to purchase that are going to stay on a shelf and be stuck. This is real life, every day, 5 minutes for you to connect and create. And so here are a couple of things I'm going to share with how you can do this. The first is I describe this as literally 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And so one of the things I wanted to suggest to you, actually, I'll stop the share. I'll come back to this in just a moment, is I go to Goodwill or the library because the library, you can get like 10 books for a dollar or whatever, and Goodwill, same thing. And it doesn't have to be poetry books. It can be, I get like Reader's Digest books, compilations. I've gotten encyclopedias. I've gotten cookbooks. It doesn't matter what book. It's really, the part of this is that you get to invite yourself into a conversation, even through picking the books. And what I do is I just pick books that I'm not going to feel bad ripping out the pages for, because it costs $1. But here's the other thing, is that poetry, becoming recycled poetry, is actually a beautiful form of poetry. So this is option one: buy some books, and then I rip out a page and I get a black marker. And I just start without thinking, without over analyzing, without over addressing, without over anything. I just start intuitively putting the marker on the words and just blacken them out. And then what's left is the poem. What's left is the poem. So then you can rewrite it over here. And so this poem became a really beautiful poem. You and I shut out the world, but I am glad each hears as if without speech. There are subtleties as if freedom, a Sabbath, the muse of it all. Now, this is not what the poem was, but this is what it became. And I'm telling you with 1000% certainty, and I want you all to email me if you do this. Please email me and tell me if you do this. But everybody's like, well, that's not really a poem, or that's not really my poem. But you and your words and your essence comes through no matter what words you take out. 100% the poem becomes yours. It's fascinating. And this is literally 5 minutes in the morning with coffee or tea. You can have a book and a black marker and just do one poem. That is one way, low tech. The second way is these you can get on Amazon for 12 bucks, these magnetic poetry things. And people are like, oh, isn't that what you put on refrigerators? And oh, why would I do that? But let me tell you, what I do with these is I get a cookie sheet and I spread these words out on a cookie sheet and I just create poems. And it's just magnets on a cookie sheet, and then you can mix them up and do it again. But what's fascinating is that the poems that you create always come through, and I have seen gorgeous poetry created from these. So 5 minutes in the morning with coffee or tea, those are two really simple ways. And so here are the examples. It's 5 minutes. And then I even included like an example of one of my poems that came from this. Let's see if I can zoom in on it. I cannot, but there it is. All right. So here's one that came from the magnets. Blossom rhythm is here, a me of historic experiment. Soul grass rustles through sacred vine, feeling red wind beyond. Now, the beautiful thing about this is you may not know what your poem means in the moment. And you may try to get your mind into it by saying, oh, that's stupid. It doesn't make sense. Who cares? I don't get it. But if you can pause for just a moment and reserve and leave judgment behind, leave criticism behind, leave expectation behind, leave imposter syndrome behind. Stop thinking about what you have to do 5 minutes from now. Stop thinking about all the people you're letting down because you're giving yourself 5 minutes. Stop thinking about all the laundry that just sits there, and you just give yourself, really gift yourself that 5 minutes of compassion through poetry. It's amazing how much you start to feel a little lighter, a little brighter. And if nothing else, you've given yourself that moment of relief. That is the gift. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to have the PhD to do this, although it's, everybody takes pride in their scholarly achievements, and I understand why, but this is an equalizer. This is you. This is the you you've always been before you went to school, before you got the degrees, before you became a parent, before you took the big job. And 5 minutes is like sacred self-compassion, self-aware time. It's really super magical. So those are two ways you can just this. And you know what? Going to Goodwill or the library on a Saturday morning for an hour is such a fun treat when you know you're just going to pick out some cool books to hang out with. I can't tell you, even doing that alone has been a remedy and a heart help for many of the people that I've worked with. When I give them the invitation, go to Goodwill, go to the library, and they always report back, I went and these are the books I got, and I've got them right here where I'm doing coffee, and I did one poem and I love it. And it's literally just like so low tech and so and accessible and equitable, and that's what I love about it. All right, so what I want to share with you now is how you can stay in touch with me and questions. So I will put up the screen for what I can do to support you. So I do retreat facilitation. I present workshops. I do one-on-one coaching and writing sessions. And this book is available, like if you want to integrate it into curriculum. This is not an academic book. It's a really easy breezy so easy to access and everyday language. And it does talk about why medicine specifically needs poetry, but really it's about you meeting yourself where you are and finding a way to integrate poetry into your life. You can reach me at Janna Lopez at creighton.edu. And so questions, and feel free just to talk. You don't have to put it in the chat. This is where I'd love to hear from you. And this is where we can communion with one another. If you have any questions or comments, let's open it up. We got a few minutes.
Jana, I'll go ahead and start. And first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful session. Just the hour alone has been just a release of stress. So thank you for that. Um, One thing I'm always asked, especially by physicians or med students, APPs, nursing students, any healthcare provider, how can I do this activity or take this knowledge and the why to my patients? So, this interaction that healthcare providers have with patients, what do you say to them in order to help them bring this into maybe bedside or in a clinic? How does that help them with their patient care?
So two steps. One is for you as an individual to recognize and internalize how this is applicable for yourself. I mean, if you don't really understand how 5 minutes writing a poem or reading a poem is helping your heart, you're not really going to be able to share it in any meaningful way. And so starting with yourself, before you think about giving it away, and it could take 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, there's no timeline, but really understanding and opening up. This is not a one size fits all. This is meeting you where you are. And this is like the Antiques Roadshow, where you go to a garage sale and there's a picture of a clown and you peel it back and oh my God, it's Abraham Lincoln's State of the Union address. Like this is where you get curious and treasure hunt with yourself and deepen and allow and continue a conversation that's organic and natural and helping and serving you. The second thing is to make poetry more accessible and integrated and equitable into everyday life. So it's not separate. And that's simply opening up meetings with beautiful poems or asking people, hey, here's a poem. What do you think of this? Or having poetry available in waiting rooms or handing out poems to patients. I'm currently volunteering at CHI Bergen Mercy, and I'm there a couple of times a week, few hours a day, and I'm asking people if they want to bring poems up to the people they're visiting. And so making it not separate from, not the thing on the pedestal out there, but the thing that's here to engage, to grow, to connect, and to search and reveal meaning on a case-by-case basis.
Really good ideas. Thank you. Any other questions for Jana?
I want to hear one thing that you all learned. I want to hear one thing that you all got out of this too. Like, how are you going to make this something?
I think for me, I've had this kind of itch or realization like I need to be take some time for me. And it's like, okay, what do you meditate? I don't know, what does that mean? Like I have an internal knowing that I need to spend some more time quietly with myself and my thoughts. And this offers like a little tangible way of doing something that feels very nebulous. And so that is what I'm going to take with me.
Good. I love that because people always say, oh, meditation, I have to meditate every day. I'm doing yoga. I got to go do this every day. It becomes this big, insurmountable thing that you have to commit and dedicate your life to, and anything less than becomes failure. And that is not what this is about. This is about continuing and opening up a conversation with yourself that meets you where you are, whatever day you're having, in whatever way it makes sense, and however it feels and flows for you. And it could be some magnets. It could be blacking stuff out or just opening up a book of poetry. One thing I do is I subscribe to poets.org and it's free and you get a poem emailed to you every day. Now, listen, I do not read the poems every day. I don't love the poems every day. I do not understand every poem every day. But what it's done is that it's exposed me to a really broad range of voices and perspectives and styles that helps me build my own confidence and lessens my intimidation. Anybody else? Dorothy, what do you think?
I have kind of a personal role of making sure that our future doctors are incorporating their own personal wellness. And I love the idea of how quick and easy this could be, and even teaching them to use this in just reflections at the end of something, is I can see a way for them to learn how to kind of blow off a little steam in a different way than they're used to.
100%. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm really, really grateful. And I'm here in support to help you with anything that you need to make that happen. What do you think, Amy?
I'm just excited to get started with putting my thoughts or my experiences on paper. So, I mean, I love the strategies that you had with the magnetic tiles and finding books of poems and kind of creating our own work, which I think I will also do. But as we've been talking, I chose the word ribbon, and so I just keep adding, and I'm just kind of like free flowing and letting it come and brainstorming and then kind of looking for themes within that, and that feels very creative and fulfilling for me. So I'm just excited to get going with this. And I hope I can do a little bit of this every day. I doubt I'm not a good one with routines. Like I'm not going to do this every single morning, probably. But I do have minutes in between meetings and assignments and working and visiting with students. So I envision I'll be doing it during those times. So I'm
Good. Pen to
excited to
paper
begin.
too. Pen to paper. You don't have to sit in front of a computer. Pen to paper.
Right,
And there you go.
right.
All right, Joanna, what do you think?
Hi. I can't even believe how much I like this, and it just kind of I reflected on the words you said, and also the poem that we were looking at, and I really enjoy it. It's like I became centered, and I was able to actually, yeah, this was great. I mean, I really like this, and I will do this. I will get a poem, and I'll sign up to that website, poets.org. And
Good. I love it. Excellent.
thank you.
Dr. Aneko, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Um, I really, really like the session. I'm a type of person that I'm creative and but poetry is not a way that I usually channel my creativity. So I'm curious to see how this goes for me and how I will use some of this. I really like the no pressure, to just let things flow. And if I'm doing it for myself, then I can always go back, look at it, learn from it, reflect on what things mean to me. So yeah, I'm curious to see how this goes for me.
All right, excellent. And so I think I'm supposed to put the slide up that you can scan your comments in, and I am available to continue this conversation. I also teach other free workshops and other things online. So I'm here in full support to encourage you and inspire you and to connect you to this work because it is profoundly meaningful, easy, accessible, and available to you at any time and has all the opportunity to grow. So I appreciate you having me and sharing our time together today.